I'm so excited to be talking to you about this. So my presentation, Vegans in the Doghouse, on challenging speciesism in research for companion animals, was really motivated by the kinds of things Nick was talking about this morning, that we have a lot of research about companion animals. I think, oh no, we're still there. Zoom's yelling at me. Let me know if you can't see my shared screen anymore. Yeah, we have a lot of research about companion animals in sociology, and it is very much focused on the idea of companion animals as family, companion animals as kin, and these very kind and effective relationships that we can have with them. And there's just so much more to be examined in human companion animal relationships. And coming into sociology, because I wanted to unpack those relationships with animals, I was always really frustrated that we had these sort of blinkers on when we were looking at pets. So I don't know if anyone else does this, but I get really sidetracked when I start picking images for my presentations. And I was picking out these images for my welcoming slide because I thought each of them showed a really interesting aspect of human companion animal relationships. And not all of them tend to factor in when we start looking at our sociological research on them. We have our person on the left who has a whole Instagram, I think, about making matching outfits with his dogs, and very much speaks to that kind of matchy relationship that people have with their pets, and that strong connection, and the different ways that we manifest that in either human-centric or animal-centric ways. And the image on the right is what gets me thinking about animal resistance and thinking about where companion animals fit within our animal liberation movements, because I think they very much fit within those liberation movements, and we don't always explicitly bring them in. But I got really stuck on that middle image, which probably doesn't look like much, but it's actually a screenshot taken from just a regular breeder website in Australia, a breeding facility where at the moment they're pushing to make their facilities even bigger so that they can breed more dogs, so that they can sell more of their children, so that more of us can have loving animal companions in our homes. And I was just looking around for different pictures of companion animals, and I stumbled on this page, which is what they called their product page. And I thought, oh, I wonder what's a product page? Is it going to be leashes or collars or like cutesy stuff that can talk about the commodification around animals? And it was actually a shop set up where all of the puppies that they sold were positioned like different kinds of products. And I don't know why this one grabbed me so much. I think sometimes when I'm looking at things for sociology and animals, the things that grab me are often not necessarily the most graphic pictures or the most kind of obvious, gory sorts of abuse, but they're these very banal, everyday things that really reinforce to me how much the oppression that we don't talk about is right in our faces. It's not really hidden. And I don't know if you can see in the top right-hand corner, there's a little thing that says 4 products, and that was the 4 different puppies that were on this page. And you can see that, you know, this is a male Cavalier ready for purchase, except that he's sold out, so you've missed out. And I just spent ages staring at this little puppy who's been put on this page like a product, very obviously, that people would buy like you would buy anything in online shopping. And I thought, I don't know why we don't see how much this commodification of animals is very much impregnated in our relationships with them. So anyway, so these are the kinds of things that I'm going to be talking about today. Essentially, I'm just making an argument that we need a sociology that centers companion animals and explicitly situates them in these kinds of oppressive patterns of relationship. They very much fit within anthropological power structures. And we need to start in our sociology with companion animals explicitly situating them in them. Otherwise, we just have this kind of sociology where we focus on the man who likes to wear matchy outfits with his dogs, and we kind of don't like to look at outside of anything like that. So, what does veganism have to do with companion animals? I hear this a lot because I talk about doing kind of emancipatory sociology, as Nick talked about. I talk about being vegan and studying companion animals, and so commonly I just get someone who says, well, I don't eat my dog, and I don't agree with people eating dogs, so isn't that kind of the end of it? And this comes back to what AFCO talks about, which is that veganism is typically associated with food, but it actually extends far more beyond who we choose not to eat. It's about the kinds of exploitation that we shirk in our daily lives, the fact that we reject the exploitation of non-human animals, and ideally that this rejection of exploitation should extend to other humans as well. So human and non-human animal entanglements are very much informed by an anthropological system of dominance. That is a system where human wants and needs are privileged over those of other animals, of the natural environment, of pretty much anything. And we are often talking about a very particular kind of privileged human there as well. And I would say companion animals very much fit squarely within this. They're not this nice relationship with non-human animals that exists outside of that pattern of oppressive relationships. They're very much underpinned by it. Non-human animals are physically and socially constructed as pet commodities. We physically construct them by forcibly breeding animals and selling their offspring so that we can have companions. They're also kind of groomed and positioned and selectively bred to emphasize traits that we like. And they're also socially constructed as pet commodities. Companion is essentially a utility category. And Cole and Stewart talk about, you know, the utility and disutility of all kinds of animals where we decide what we want to do with them and then construct them accordingly. Companion animals are constructed to be companionate. If they are not companionate, if they don't give us the unconditional love that we would like, or they don't behave in ways that are pleasing to us, we see the consequences of this in animals that can be rejected, they can be sent to shelters, they can be killed, they can be a whole different things. They can just be left out in the backyard and not have any attention paid to them because they did not fulfill their role as ever-loving companion. So all of this is kind of what's been informing my approach to companion animals as I've been doing my studies. And I see these kinds of pictures all of the time where we say the only difference between a puppy and a piglet or a puppy and a calf is your attitude. And I just always come back to this question of how different is it? Is it as different as we think it is? And I would say no, I think they're underpinned by quite the same sorts of oppressive entanglements all of the time. So our sociological treatment of companion animals, as I mentioned, has been very much focused on families and positive relationships. And as Erica Codworth says, including non-human animals as a sociological subject does not a critical sociology make. This comes back to the ideas Nick was talking about around a social construction of knowledge, things that are made visible and things that are made invisible. And what's made visible is that we have affectionate relationships with companion animals. They're very important to us. And my dogs are about to bark, that's going to happen. They're very important to us, and these are the kinds of things that we focus on. When we did a critical analysis of sociological literature around animals, we found that overwhelmingly articles about companion animals are more anthropocentric and more depoliticized than articles about any other use category of non-human animals, which means that articles that center companion animals or involve companion animals are more likely to feed into their oppression than many other articles about non-human animals. And I think this is something really important to think about as sociologists who study companion animals. What kinds of things are we feeding into? What kinds of things do we want to be feeding into? If you're trying to do a critical sociology of companion animals, you need to think very, very carefully about how your work informs that, how it reflects that, and what kinds of resistance you're actually doing. And Erica Fudge really highlights this as well, that she talks about how we have a veil of affection around companion animals. We sort of look at the fact that we love our dogs, we love our cats, we love companion animals generally, and we sort of place our blinkers when we're thinking about animals around that affective relationship. We don't see anything that happens.
Oh, yeah, I think we might have lost you.
Ourselves, one of the stories we have is that companion animals love us and they would choose this relationship if they could. So it's okay to have pets because we love us and they love them. And that's really, you know, that's great. I like to think my dog does love me. But at the same time, if my dog loves me, if she loves other dogs, what does that mean for the familial relationships that she had before I acquired her? And this is something that came up quite a bit in the interviews that I did with human owners as well. This idea that they thought about how their dog had friends and they'd never thought about their dog's life before they had been acquired. And I saw these kind of breakdown moments. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I'm just going to go with it. I saw these kind of breakdown moments where owners would think through centering their animals and their lives and what they were like. And then they would get to this point where they would say, my dog loves other dogs. She loves her relationships. She has friends. She remembers them. She values these very important relationships. I've never thought about the relationship she had with her mother. I've never thought about the relationship she had with her brothers and sisters. And what does it mean for pet relationships if they can love, if they can form these bonds? How do I justify the fact that I've taken this dog away from her family so that I can love her? We also have another contradictory narrative, which is that we can justify creating pets and force breeding them and selling their children because they don't feel things like humans are. They don't love like we do. And if that's true, if that's our reason for having pets, then why do we have pets? If we think that they love us, then that kind of makes sense that you want to have these affectionate relationships. But if animals can't love and that's why we can treat them as we do, then what even is a companion animal? What does that even mean? And these kind of dual narratives sit side by side. And I think it's really interesting that we kind of have them at both times operating to justify this idea that we can have pets and that we have this companion animal relationship that's important. And they never really seem to intersect and we don't really seem to look at them. which is not to say that no one looks at pets critically. We do have a body of work that highlights the oppression and dominance that's inherent in creating pets and creating companion animal relationships. Some of that is sociologists noting in passing that companion animals are caught up in the same oppressions as other non-human animals, but perhaps to a lesser extent. But Roland and Roland highlight that this is rarely explored in detail despite unacceptable treatment of animal companions. We don't necessarily focus on the fact that sometimes we treat animals who are destined as companions just as appallingly, just as horrendously, and just as oppressively as animals who are destined for other categories. We just don't really see it in our scholarship. Others have really highlighted the unavoidable domination underpinning relationships. So the fact that if we want to forcibly breed animals, if we want to talk about desexing and regulating bodies and what it actually means to live multi-species lives, there is kind of domination and necessary human centering in that we can't really get away from. There's no way to have unproblematic human companion animal relationships. We can work towards less problematic, but we can't really shirk that domination altogether. And this exploitative context really positions companion animals so that humans always have the power over them. It's always human breeders, human owners who have the power over companion animals. And this opens them up to a range of physical and emotional abuse, as some theorists have highlighted. But it also really brings up the kind of everyday struggle of power. Things like, you might hear people talk about how their cat rules the roost, but when I went to people's houses, which was part of my methodology to center animals, was to make sure the animals were physically there, you start to see the way that every day we have these kinds of power inequalities, whether it be that animals aren't necessarily empowered to feed themselves, so they're reliant on us for food. Maybe they don't have freedom of access around the house. Maybe they have complete freedom within your house and can somehow manage to do everything, but as soon as they go out your front door, they're in a social context where they have no value. They can essentially be stolen, run over, killed, and there's nothing that really anyone can do about it because they're not valued in society. And so I think the issue isn't necessarily that we don't have people thinking critically about pets, because we definitely do, but that these critiques aren't really brought into conversation with empirical work, even by the scholars who make them. So Leslie Irvine has an article where she talks about pets as a kind of enslavement and says, you know, is our enjoyment, are these really important bonds justifiable to enslave another being? No, they're not really. But I haven't seen that critique filter into her kind of symbolic interactionist work with pets. And I think that tells us something really interesting about that intersection of empirical research and theory. That means we don't necessarily end up with kind of grounded animal-centering empirical work that critiques animal relationships. I'm conscious I'm down to 2 minutes because I've rambled for too long. So I'm going to bring up these things kind of quickly and pick them back up if they're interesting to people. So where I think this leads us is trying to pursue a critical sociology that is for companion animals. And for me, this means bringing together those empirical understandings of human companion animal relationships with the critical understandings of them. This means creating space for companion animal inclusion in our methods in the way that we write up research, making sure that we don't write animals out or write them in kind of objectifying ways. Challenging anthropocentric methods and narratives, which often leads to the kinds of mess that we were talking about this morning. We don't necessarily have a perfect theoretical model for highlighting this everyday experience of oppression in kind of lived ethnographic experiences and research. But we kind of need to sit comfortably with that mess if we want to push forward with making more critical research around companion animals. And I think the work of Goffman and symbolic interaction is something that we could really explore a little bit more about how we could use that to inform a critical animal studies. I know it's not typically been used as a critical kind of framework, but this idea of highlighting the everyday and challenging taken for granted assumptions, I think really comes from shining a lens on what everyday lived relationships look like. And as we've seen in the previous presentations, when you go back and actually look for animals, you see different things about them than when you weren't looking at all. And fundamentally, we need kind of a sociology that is explicitly emancipatory, which means that if you are researching with pets, I think it's really important that you situate companion animals in that exploitative context, because otherwise, with the social norms we have around pets, it's just interpreted as a validation of companion animals as families. So we need that kind of really explicit critique. So I'm not going to spend too long on this finishing slide because I know you can read it and I have 1 minute left. But I think my underlying argument is that sociology is really well placed to situate these relationships in a context of commodification, in a context of exploitation and structural oppression. So we can do better, and I think we should. I think there's something really powerful in making the familiar strange, and I'd like to pursue different kinds of ways of bringing that everyday sort of oppression and the things that we can find in a symbolic interaction lens with broader understandings of social movements and pushing back on social structures. And I think there's something that when we're looking at animal liberation, we can really learn from the ways that humans interact with their companion animals, because often they might not call it resistance, but they are very much pushing back on the idea that their animal companions are commodified, or that they are just kind of nothing but mere goods. And there's something there, I think, that could be really useful in understanding how we might pursue better resistance for animals in the future. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Zoe. Fantastic timekeeping, really great paper, very provocative, lots of great ideas in there. The downside is we didn't see your presentation. We only got the first slide.
What?
It never moves. Well, I didn't move in my screen anyway. And Nicola, I can see Nicholas is saying that too, and Josephine. So somehow it got stuck on the first slide. I don't know why, but anyway.
Okay, I will upload that later.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Excellent. You'll just have to believe me. It was
Look, thank you. It was a fantastic talk. I'm sure there'll be. It was a very powerful first slide, though, as Alexandra said. Who would like to? Now, I know the raise hand function doesn't seem to be working. So what I've got is you on a matrix of like a set of CCTV control room screens. So people just raise their hands, put in the box if they want to ask a question, and I will come to you. Let's see if anyone's gonna. Oh, yeah, I've got Christina, you first.
Hello. Good morning. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about my English. It is very interesting, the relation of people with domestic animals and especially companion animals, that it is a thing that the world in all the world is rising. People have more and more companion animals, and this leads also to their commodification and also many abandonments of those animals in the streets. In Greece, it is a great problem, but also it is an interesting area to research how people that have companion animals and they acknowledge them as sentient beings and as family members still eat other animals, that they feel the empathy about not the specific animals that they have, but maybe to all the animals, but also they still eat them. This is a question. I made some interviews some years ago with people in a shelter of dogs, and they acknowledge that eating meat is something bad. They feel guilty, but they still eat the animals, despite they were working with dogs every day. And this is something very weird for me, how people separate animals and eat them.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point. Something that I will say, it's related, I'm not going off topic. When I was doing my interviews, I was really careful to include any animals that human participants thought were a pet. And what this brought up was some really interesting things around how we decide who constitutes a pet and who isn't. And this comes back to your question of eating animals, because I went to some houses where they would have chickens who were pets, but they would also have chickens who were not pets and could be eaten. Or they would have kind of ideas around, you know, my cow might be a pet, but cows generally are food. They're not companions. They're not like living beings and things. And I thought this raised a really interesting question around not just the fact that we have pet owners who really care about their animals and have questions about why can't everyone care about animals while they are, you know, eating a cow flesh sandwich. But also it's just so extensive that you can look at kind of a particular animal and not even recognize their own relatives or animals that look like them as non-food as well. It really speaks to the social construction of animals, I think, which is not necessarily tied to species as we might often talk about it, but is just very much tied to how we construct animals and what we're thinking about when we look at them. I don't know if that answers your question, or that might have just been a bit of a ramble. But I always come back to the example of the rabbit in Matthew Cole and Kate Stewart's work, when they have the rabbit on their practico-discursive map to show that we have one species of animal who occupies all of these different positions. We can eat them if they're meat. They might be companion animals. We might class them as pests and therefore killable. And we have these very different understandings of one species of animal that might look the same, but we treat them very differently. And somehow our social construction is so extensive, it doesn't make that seem strange. It's interesting in a terrible.
Great points, Zoe. I think we've just probably don't have time for Josephine. I'm sorry, we've just hit our time. But you can always put it down in the box, obviously the chat box, and that'll just keep that dialogue going. But thanks so much, Zoe. That was really fantastic. And now we're going to pass